web application security. This is kind of a big deal, and given the talks what you guys were talking about earlier, it's kind of awesome to see that there's a lot of interest in security in this room. A lot of places where I go and speak, honestly, people kind of think of security as the least important part of software development. Me, obviously, I'm a penetration tester or ethical hacker. It depends really on who you talk to, what term we use. For me, security is super important. But I also do realize that security is not the most important thing with software development. Developing the software needs to be first. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look through some common web application vulnerabilities. These are the kind of things that I tend to see in every single test that I do. And I thought it might be useful to go through actually how these things can link together, or the steps that I go through to actually try and exploit these vulnerabilities that I find. Before I do that, does anyone know any of these terms? Go on, give me one.
Elite.
What does that mean? Yeah, exactly. Anyone else? Any other terms? Go on.
Owned or phoned, whichever you want to say it.
Okay.
A friend of mine, Troy Hunt, runs that website. So.
Okay, so are you looking at...
Have I been owned?
Yeah, okay, so we actually call that pwned or owned. What that means is to be hacked. Kind of an interesting story there, just a little side note. The reason why it's spelled like that, pwned, it used to be owned, as in I've owned you. But P and O are next to each other on the keyboard. So when people were typing I owned you, a lot of the time they would just accidentally type P, so it became known as pwned. Go on, one more. Does anyone do one? Go on.
Well, white hats, you should be a white hat.
Exactly.
Black hat with a bad guy.
Exactly, so white hat, like a good guy hacker, black hat, bad guy hacker. These terms came from like the old cowboy films, you'd have the white hat and the black hats. And then of course phreaking is hacking with the phones, and a handle, just like a little hacker name, and then 0 day or O day is a vulnerability that the patch doesn't exist yet. Okay, cool. So awesome. So you guys seem to kind of, at least know some security stuff, which is awesome to see. So just a quick intro to myself. My name's Jahmel Harris. My Twitter handle is there if you want to follow me. I'm a security consultant at Digital Interruption. So that's the company that I started with Saskia here. Really, we want to kind of remove the mystery around security. We wanted to kind of help embed security into organizations and development teams. A lot of the time, at least in the past, I would go in and I'll do a test, and the only thing I have at the end of it is a report that I hand over. I don't think that's the best way to do security. It kind of requires QA testers and developers to be thinking about security, and that's why we started Digital Interruption. I'm quite interested in mobile, radio stuff, and reverse engineering, just in case you're interested. Oh, and I run a group called Manchester Grey Hats. This is a group that meets on I think it's the last Wednesday of each month. We put on free workshops around security. We did a workshop a little while ago about software-defined radio. We did one on Frida, which is this application hooking framework. The end of this month, we're going to be doing man-in-the-middle attacks. And they're all just free workshops, a couple of hours, just to try and help people understand a bit more about security. OK, so why should we, as in we, developers, testers, care about security? So can I just get a show of hands here? Who is a developer? OK. Kind of. And what about testers? OK. I mean, that doesn't really surprise me, given what this group is. What about project managers? Is there any project managers here? OK, so a few. OK, awesome. So why should we care about security? We want to be proud of what we make. So I notice a lot of time that developers, when they look at their code, they want to be proud of it, but for some reason, security isn't necessarily something they're considering when they think about their code quality. They're thinking about, is it testable, or all the other things they care about. But security is often not there. We want to protect our customers' data. Now, this is increasingly important because of GDPR, which was mentioned earlier. We need to show that we're actively protecting our customers' data. Reputational damage. we don't want to be the talks, right? We don't want to be the ones that get hacked and everyone's talking. I always use TalkTalk as an example. I would hate if I was the guy that wrote that website and everyone is now using my code as another example of kind of bad code. Kind of a big thing is, so compliance kind of that goes into this GDPR stuff. We want to be able to release on time. So if we're thinking about security internally, we don't have to use external consultants who may only be able to test on certain dates or certain times or may hold up things. So if we can think of it internally, we can work a little quicker. And plus also, we're really, really expensive. If you can do it internally, I mean, you're saving a lot of money. And you're not waiting until the end to add security, which again is the most expensive time to add security into, or to fix any kind of bug really. You don't want to do it at the end, do it early. The same is with security. Okay, so what are we going to look at here? It's called HackersOn. You can download it. It's a example web application. It's realistic in the way it works. A lot of these sample web apps, they're kind of challenge-based or CTFs. This one was designed to be a realistic application. So it's basically just like a shopping store, similar to Amazon. There are lots of vulns in this application. Now, we're only going to have time to look at a few of them, a few of the most common ones. We're going to look for the ones that we're actually going to be able to compromise, kind of use to compromise the server. And then we'll look at some that we'll use to attack some clients as well. What we'll talk about here is relevant to not just web apps, but mobile apps, Internet of Things, anything really that might use HTML or web applications within it. This stuff is relevant for. I've used some of the things we'll look at. Oh no, actually, I don't think it is in this talk, but command injection is kind of a big thing with web apps, especially with embedded systems. And I've used that a lot with things like embedded routers to get access to like a shell, to the firmware on the device, all because they've got a vulnerable web application. Obviously, the disclaimer, you shouldn't use this stuff to break the law, basically. If you want to hack something, make sure you've got permission, or find something that's online that is free for you to use and you're able to use. Don't just start running scans across people's websites because you will get in a lot of trouble. So we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at attacking clients. Basically, as an attacker, we want to have some effect on the other users of the application. We might want to steal their password or something, but this will be an attack on that user. It may kind of go through the server. We may use the server as kind of like a pivot point, but we are attacking the client. We want to try and get some kind of malicious code or to force another user of the application to do something on our behalf. A lot of the time, these are kind of seen as less important. They're not really prioritized because there's a kind of idea that the web browser should protect the user. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. And so, as web developers, as testers, we need to start thinking about can a malicious user impact other clients of the application? Can we get them to make a request on our behalf? The other kind of thing we'll look at here is obviously attacking the server. Now, this can be useful if, for example, we're an attacker, we want to access internal company. The server we want to access that contains the data we're after may be firewalled and protected. But if there's a web server there that's vulnerable, we may be able to pivot through that web server and access the server on the internal network. Which one do attackers tend to use? Do they tend to go after servers or clients? Well, it really depends on whatever's easiest. At the end of the day, most attackers, they have a goal. They want to get someone's password or they want to access an account, and they will use whichever route is easiest, whether it's attacking the client or whether it's going after the server. So let's see if we can actually see some of this stuff in action. Now, apologies because demos always go wrong, and this is a very demo-heavy talk. So if anything happens, I spend a minute trying to fix it, but we may have to move on. But let's hope that nothing goes wrong. Okay. Any questions so far? If you have any questions throughout the talk, just ask, because the next part I hope will be the majority of the talk, going through the application. It can be a little bit confusing if you've not seen it before, and I'm doing everything locally here. So if you get confused about which part is the attacker and which part is the client and which part the server, just speak up.
What's the tool you're using at the moment? Is that OZAP?
So this is Burp Suite.
Okay.
I'll talk about this in a second. And then this. So this is Hackers On. So as you see, just a kind of average, like normal application. You can browse. So the first thing we're going to do is make an account. Oh damn, this is. Okay. So I'm gonna make an account. User. Okay. Yes. Who can guess what password I'm using? Okay, so this is register, isn't it? Oh, okay. Huh. Okay, well, so I've just registered an account for the application. The first thing that I tend to do is I want to understand what pages exist within the application. I want to see which ones might be vulnerable. I want to get an overview of kind of what's going on. So this tool here is Burp Suite. It's a intercepting proxy. I have my web browser set up to go through Burp Suite. So I can see in Burp Suite all the requests that I'm making through the browser. So what we can see here, hopefully, as an example, this is a request the application just made. I'm creating a user. So this is the HTTP protocol. If you guys are familiar with that, this is what a request looks like in the background. So we're just kind of intercepting, so we can see, we can view and modify things that go through. Burp has quite a good feature that lets you spider the application, which is basically just going to look through all the links in the application and see, try and show them all to you in this section here. So what we're going to do, okay, so let's see if I can see it. So if we right click on this, okay, which one is spider? I can't see too easy. Okay, there we go. So we're just going to spider this. And then you'll see, oh, okay. So what we have here is gone on and looked for kind of all the pages it can see within the website. Okay, so I mean there are some kind of standard ones. The first one I tend to look at is robots.txt. Who knows what robots.txt is for? Go on.
It's like it's for search engine, so you tell it amongst other what not to index.
Exactly. A lot of people use this to put in kind of hidden directories. So they might put a directory that shouldn't be indexed by the search engine. So I like to just look at this and see if there's anything that they've tried to hide, which robots.txt should never be used for, by the way. You can see my mouse. Oh, okay. But this one's empty. So, you need to be careful when you're spidering applications, though, because it will try and hit every link in the application. If there's a link that, for example, deletes all users, and you've logged an admin, it will delete all users. I've seen it before. My friend, he accidentally had this running in the background, went onto a website, logged in, and then completely owned their site because it was doing all kinds of things in the background, and he had to send his email apologizing for what happened. So we didn't see anything there that's super interesting, but no problem. Because obviously I have some more tools that we can use. So this is Dirtbuster. What this will do is you'll give it a dictionary of directories, and it will try and see if that directory exists on the web server. So it's going to take the website and just try different paths at the end to see if it can find something that exists but isn't linked to in the main application. So
does tool rely on the fact that people give directories meaningful names as opposed to just random names?
Yeah, so it is a based on a word list. So yeah, I mean it is a case of meaningful names. Also, a lot of the time people use frameworks and whatnot that has standard names. They forget to remove them. So Dirtbuster in the list will look for those. So yeah, I mean you can I guess if everything had a completely random name, that would be one way to kind of have security through obscurity, though. It's better to lock things down properly. Yeah, exactly. So we've given this just a list and then the application, the IP address of the application. We'll hit start, and it'll go off and it will look through the word list for directories. And what we'll see here that we didn't see before is this one here, /API. Okay, that's probably interesting. We won't look at that today, but there are vulnerabilities in there. But what we will look at is this one, /admin. Okay, that's probably kind of interesting. So let's see if we can navigate to okay, cool. So it's asking us for a username and password in the admin area. One thing that people tend to do at this point is try and guess username and password. Right? This isn't a super technical attack, but it can be quite successful. So back to burp. I'm going to make a little assumption here. When you start cracking passwords and things, you get a feel for what it's likely to work. I'm going to assume that the username is admin. Now, there will be ways to confirm that. You know, if you username enumeration vulnerability in the application, maybe you just might get an email from admin at site. But let's just assume that it's admin. We'll just try a random password, and of course, it won't work. So we can use burp to try and brute force that. So here is the request we just made. You can see the username and password. And we'll send this to this tool here called Intruder. And in Intruder, we have the ability to say, I want to change so password. So basically, we highlight in password as the this value, and we're gonna change that with the value that comes from a file. So it's going to try all the passwords we have in the file. So we're going to set the payload here. And I'm just going to load it from this file I created called password list. Okay, so we're just going to open that, and then you'll see it has a list of all the passwords. Now, of course, I've stripped this down just to work for the demo. Other tools exist that are more complex password brute forces, so they will mutate words from the dictionaries and whatnot, but this is quite a simple one. So if we start attack, so this is the free version of burp, but it is limited, I think, to like 1 request a second or something. The pro version is a lot faster. Okay, so what you'll see here is it tries lots of different passwords. Okay, so these are all the requests it makes. And then when it gets to this point, you see the length of the request has changed? That means that the data that gets back is now different. So the data is now getting back from the web server. So it's likely that this one had some effect that the other ones didn't have. So it's likely that's the right password. Does that make sense to everyone? Yep, cool. So what we'll do is we'll try logging in with and then, yeah, of course. So we brute force the password. We got into the admin area. What can we do?
Back to your, sorry,
Go on.
I asked questions in the panel. So going back to the response length.
Yeah.
If you made it the same for every single request.
So what you could do instead is, I mean, that might trip someone up for a little while.
Yeah.
There will be something that's different, obviously, because it's a different page.
Yeah.
So if you've logged in successfully and logged in unsuccessful, the response is different. So what you could do is you could just search on the page. So Burp has a cool feature that lets you grep for strings in the page. So you could grep for like login unsuccessful, and then like reverse that to show the one page that doesn't say it. So again, like security through obscurity, you know, it is a technique that might slow someone down, but it shouldn't be relied on because by its nature there has to be a different page that's returned.
Yeah.
And I'm just using the length here just because it was an easy thing to see.
No, I was just
Yeah. I like the way you're thinking though. So here we have we've logged into the admin area. We can, for example, see the users. We can add users if we want with different roles. We can upgrade our role to be an admin user, so our normal account would be an admin user. We won't do that stuff now. Let's try and get into some of the more interesting things.
What is the status in that indicate? Is it the HTTP status?
You mean here, in Burp at the top?
Status.
Yeah, so that's the HTTP status, exactly. So, I mean, yeah, there will be different ways to see like what was successful, what wasn't successful. So I use Burp Intruder a lot, not just for like brute forcing passwords. To be honest, it's not the best tool for that, but let's say there's like an identifier, like an ID in the URL. I can just use Burp to just increment that loads and see if I can like hit I don't know, like a page that I shouldn't be able to access, or so any time when you have a form that you want to be able to change like a value or a few values in it, Intruder is really good for that.
So could you use it to like interrogate a JWT token, take the data out of that?
So you could, yeah. If it's random enough, then you're not going to find anything. So Burp actually has another cool feature that does let you check the randomness of tokens, right? So what you can do is you can get like hundreds of thousands of tokens and say to it, how random are these? And it'll do its analysis and it'll come back and say, oh, this is likely not to be as random as maybe you think it is. So if you're using a framework or something and that has some kind of token, that's usually okay. If you're creating like custom tokens, you need them to be random, you can use this. Okay, so any other questions? Did you?
I'm going to say, you said at the start that security is like pretty much the last on the list of
for some people, yeah.
development. Is that from personal experience or?
Yeah, sometimes. Not all the time. Yeah, but a lot of the time.
Okay. Have you tried to, I don't know, maybe overcome that?
So we could talk about that at the end, yeah. But
Yeah, that's fine.
but yeah, I mean, it's definitely an issue that I face a lot.
Yeah. Interested to know how you tried to overcome that.
Okay, we'll have a chat after them. Yeah. No. It's again a really interesting question, and there's no like one answer to it. I mean, that in itself could be a talk, I think. So okay, let's continue. So we've got access to this admin area. Okay, so what I want to try and do now is do some kind of client-side attack. Is that what I wanted to do? Yes. Client-side attack. So who's familiar with cross-site scripting? A few people. Okay, so we can do, I'll talk a bit about that then before we actually perform the attack. So we'll just try and bring this back. So back to the main site. There's this search bar at the top, right? Obviously, that's going to let us search for products in this store. For anyone that can notice here, so whatever I type in, so in this case, the word funny, is being echoed back on the page, right? Which is kind of normal behavior. The user might want to know what they've searched for, or is showing you this has been searched this turning up when you search for this phrase. So that in itself is not an issue. But cross-site scripting is where it takes that data and doesn't sanitize it properly. So what we can do as an attacker is, for example, so I'm just taking the link for that image. Source equals that.
Can you zoom that?
Do you want me to zoom? Is it hard to see? Yeah, I guess it probably is, isn't it? So, people see that? So basically what I've done is I've put in some HTML characters, all right? So what we saw is that whatever I typed in got put on the page. If I type in some HTML characters, what will happen here? Oh, okay. There, okay, let me zoom back out. So you'll see it's replaced our data and it's put that HTML directly on the page. When you hear about websites that have been defaced, a lot of the time it is something like this. Often it's a bit more of an advanced version, which we'll look at soon. But this kind of thing, you have a way to put data on the page. If I, as an attacker, were to send this link to someone as an email and say, hey, click here, this cool product, you'd click it, and this is the page that you'll see, because the HTML that we've injected is coming from the URL at the top. You see, so it's just send as a GET request. Okay, that makes sense to everyone? Yeah, cool. So it's literally just taking it from the GET request and it's putting it on the page, and now we have a way to control the page. So I mean that's kind of interesting, but is it dangerous? I mean, you got now an image on the page. What if we did something like? So, for those that can't see, I've added some JavaScript in here, okay? So let's add that to the page and see what happens. And of course, that gets executed. So this is cross-site scripting. We've managed to inject JavaScript into the page. So again, if I send this URL to someone, realistically, it would be hundreds of thousands of people, everyone that I think may use this application, and say, hey, click here. Now my JavaScript is running within the browser. Okay, so we've got some JavaScript in the browser, cool. Well, that JavaScript actually has access to everything that page has access to, including the cookie, right? So here we're just echoing it on the page, but what an attacker would actually do is they would send that cookie off to some server somewhere. Now, the cookie value here is what's used to authenticate the user. So if I have access to their cookie, I can log in as that user. So if I can inject JavaScript onto the page, I can steal the cookie and then log in as them. My favorite payload, though, I'm going to show you now, because I think it's super cool. Maybe you guys won't agree. I'm a bit of a dweeb, so. Okay, so let's see if this works. I might need to just copy this, type this in here. Okay, so what I've done, I mean, you can't really see it because it's just executed. But basically I did a script source equals, and then some JavaScript that got pulled off an external server. So it's a server that I'm running locally, hence why it says localhost. Realistically, this will be, attacker.com or whatever domain they owned. And what this payload that I've just loaded does, as you'll see, it actually sends the cookie to my server. So now as an attacker, I have access to their cookie. But even better than that, it actually, if this works, can you see what's happening here? So it's actually a keylogger in JavaScript. right? So I say to the user, click on this link. They click on the link, and now I only have access to their session token, but I actually can see what they're typing in. So then they will obviously go and think, okay, interesting. I'll log in. Now the user at this point, they don't have any idea, any understanding of what happened. They just click the link from an email, they log into the application, and because we can add JavaScript, we have access to the password. So sign in, and there we go. So they've logged in with our JavaScript running, with access to their session tokens, anything they type in. Basically, we can do anything the application can do at that point. Does that make sense to everyone? Yeah, cool. I have a question.
Yes, the session token stuff. I know there's a couple of people wanted to get it from packets and too.
Yeah.
Is there a way to solve that problem?
Of session tokens?
Yeah.
So often I'll advise to use the HTTP only and secure cookie flags, which means that they can't be read from JavaScript. So there are then other attacks you might be able to perform similar actions, but you won't directly be able to read the cookie. So it's like one extra step. Oftentimes when I do a pen test report and I have something as a low risk issue, such as cookie tokens not set, it gets ignored because it's low risk. But what it might actually stop is something like this. Someone's actually stealing a token. So it's a low risk issue. The recommendation, can technically be ignored, but what we should try and do is make things as hard for the attacker as we can. So, yeah, there are other ways you can authenticate, but tokens is kind of what's standard. So we kind of have to assume they're in use and write applications. So, for example, if it's not vulnerable to cross-site scripting, then there's no issue there with the token being stolen. Yeah. Okay, so. So this is cool, but the user needs to click on this link for it to activate. What if there's a way to remove that need? There is. So let me log out of this. So as an attacker, I notice there's this FAQ page that allows me to type in an email address and a question. Okay, it appears on the page. Now, this is probably vulnerable to cross-site scripting. So let me use the same payload So this is the payload that you didn't see before, but it's just basically loading a bit of JavaScript from an external server. So if I submit this now, again, the same payload is being activated, but this time, notice that it doesn't matter whether if the JavaScript is not in the URL. Someone only needs to browse to this page for this payload to be activated, and then of course, whatever I type in is being sent to the attacker server. So this is called a stored cross-site scripting because it's actually being stored within the application's database and then being retrieved, and we've injected JavaScript into the page that way. Now, if I was to log in, we'd be able to still capture the username and password without requiring someone to click on the link that we've supplied them. Yeah, does that make sense? Cool. So reflected was the first type. Stored is this type here. Both are dangerous. Stored is arguably more dangerous because you don't require any user interaction. You've just put JavaScript into the site, and this is where a lot of the the defacements come from, because you've actually managed to put JavaScript permanently into the page. So yeah, anything that's vulnerable to, anything that's using kind of HTML, as I said before, could be vulnerable to this kind of attack. I remember testing a mobile application once that had a web view, so HTML in it. And it's actually a pretty cool attack. I can't go into too much details, but it connected to like a device over Bluetooth. And I was actually able to inject HTML JavaScript from that device into the application. They executed on the app. Then I used that to steal a password that the application is stored in the sandbox and I can send it off to the server. All because it was runnable to Crosssite scripting. So we won't look at any more client-side attacks, but I mean, you can see how this can be a big deal, right? The usernames, passwords, credit card details, etc. So I'm just gonna log in. Close that. Okay, so I've just logged in as just the test user. Documents. In documents, so if people can't see, at the top of the page here is accounts/documents page equals delivery.html. Okay, so now what that's likely doing is it's loading an HTML page off of the server. You know, it's just reading it from disk basically. So as an attacker, I wonder whether I can access other files that are on the file system. So I know that it's reading, you know, delivery.html. Let's see if I can force it to open some other file that's stored on the server. Because I know this is running Linux, I can do. Okay, so we've forced it to, instead of reading the file it was supposed to be reading, we're saying read ... etc. /etc/password. So ... is the is a way of saying up one folder, basically. So what we're saying is rather than reading, you know, page.html from the current directory, from the current folder, go up until you get to the root directory and then /ut/password. So of course we can read now any file now that the web server has access to on that file system. We can, as an attacker, can read. This file is quite important because it actually shows us all the users for the web server, or for the server. Luckily, not the passwords because that's stored in a different file. Well, the password hashes is stored in a different file. But this is like a good one to read. Anything else that was sensitive on the disk, you know, databases or passwords or whatever, we could take advantage of this to read. Any questions?
How many vulnerabilities actually exist now? Created for this site alone, right? I mean, 10 years ago when I was reading about this stuff, there's directory traversal.
Yeah, I still see it.
Vulnerability, but I can't believe that something like Nginx or...
Yeah. Well,
still
so, I mean, if you've written your application incorrectly, it will be vulnerable. Right. I still see these ones a lot. Yes, I mean, there are protections and good applications should take advantage of those protections, whether it's a web application firewall or whether it's the web server actually protecting you or good coding practices, but we still see this a lot. And an important thing to kind of think about is people may know how to fix this in websites, but as I said before, like when you start moving those onto mobile platforms or hardware platforms, Internet of Things devices, are they thinking it the same? And no. So actually I see a lot of these on embedded platforms where people tend to need to do it themselves, and they just seem to have forgotten everything they've learned over the last 10 years. Yeah? Does that answer your question? So I do see these a lot, yeah. So on Android... Yeah.
People are using new platforms and migrating stuff. They will potentially forget these lessons.
Yeah.
10 years ago.
I know. So none of these attacks here are new attacks, but they are attacks that I see a lot. When I first started testing Android applications, a lot of them were vulnerable to this, not within the web components, but just the way that it works. So for Android, I won't go into too many details, but Android applications have a way of accessing files from within the sandbox. You have a content provider that you expose, and that was vulnerable to directory traversal.
Is it not more the configuration issue rather than the application?
No, it's the application, yeah. Because the application is saying just take this page that's coming in from this request and open it, read it, display it. So if you give it a different path, it will read it, it'll open it, read it, and display it. So it's an application issue.
That you typed just there, like go backwards, wouldn't even list the directory, because if you set a If you configure your application, how to list the directory?
So if you configure it properly, if you say like don't go outside of this directory, what you can also do is have direct applications running on separate disks, so that the worst case is someone can get up to the root of that disk, but they won't be able to jump to another disk. So I mean, there are configuration things you can do, and configuration is definitely a part of it. But in this case, it's an application issue because it's just taking the request.
You configure it to list it, like explicitly. You say like to list all the directory. It will do in general case, like if you installing an app in production, like it would never be.
Okay, so
default settings.
Yeah, sure.
Things.
So this isn't directory listing though. Yeah, so this isn't directory listing.
It is kind of.
So you're talking about like if you have a web server.
Just, delete the password there, like it'll list the whole directory.
No. So because this isn't application. I mean, this isn't what you're talking about. So this is a separate issue. This isn't a configuration. This is the application is reading the path that we're sending in.
Oh, in the search bar.
Yeah. Does that make sense? So it's just literally taking that string, and then it's in code it might say, file open this thing. And if you've not sanitized that properly, if you've not taken out all these bad characters, or said only read from this directory, or this or that, then it's going to just take that, open it, then the operating system is going to turn that into the actual path and then open it. Yeah? I mean, it's a good question, but does that make sense? They are different things. Okay, so let's go on. So I also noticed as an attacker, my profile, that there is a way to upload files to this application. In this case, it's just an image. So first thing I'm going to do is right. So, good picture, right? So I just added a profile picture to my account. It makes sense. Often when I can upload a file, it means I might be able to do something a bit more malicious than that. So let's try and upload something that's not a file, not an image, and see what happens. So I will So what I'm going to try and do is upload an HTML file instead of an image. Okay? And then I will save. See how there's this little broken image icon here? Which is probably, it says to me that it's probably trying to read this HTML file as an image and display it. So so I'm just copying the image location. So right-click, copy image location, and paste it in. This is my HTML file that I've just uploaded. It just has a bit of JavaScript and some HTML. So now we've uploaded our own files and actually HTML into the application. Okay, that is cool. And if cross-site scripting doesn't exist, we might be able to use something like this to perform similar attacks where we've injected JavaScript. But we can take this one step further. Can anyone guess what I'm going to do next?
Upload a PHP file?
Yeah, exactly. So this application is written in PHP. So rather than uploading a HTML file, I'll upload a PHP file. So save. So hopefully now if I copy image location. So now I've run that PHP file, which now this is executing on the server. This isn't just code that's executing on the client, this is running on the server. So this...
Yeah, okay, you've uploaded it. How? What initiates the execution of it?
Okay, because it's because that way the application is working, it's a PHP application. It's reading PHP files off this just through normal execution. You go to like home.php, it will read that off the file server, and then execute that, and then display the results to the user, right? Does that make sense? Right. So what we've done is we've added our own PHP file onto the disk. Then we've navigated to it. And so the server is just loading that, executing it, and displaying it. Because it doesn't know that it's supposed to be an image. So all it sees is the PHP file, and it's just doing what it does. So with this PHP file, we can execute commands. So if we do ls, for example, this is being run on the server. If I do who am I, the user the web server is running as. Okay, so now we have full command access to the server. This is a bit nasty. We can get a kind of a nicer looking shell if there's time, I guess. Okay, cool. So we'll try and go from this kind of nasty PHP shell to a proper shell. So what I'm going to do here is, so basically I'm just going to use netcat, which is just a tool that we use to make TCP connections. I'm going to get that to listen on port 4444. Okay? So that's just sitting there listening. And then, because I can execute commands on the server, I will get that to connect to me. Okay, so I've typed in this command. Basically, it's running netcat. Then it's going to just pipe everything from bin bash, which is the shell, over that TCP connection to me. So now if we see from here, so this is a terminal that I have on my machine, but it's got a connection to the server. So if I do ls, again, this is being run on the server. So now what I can do is use a cool bit of Python to get a slightly nicer looking shell. So this is kind of more what you kind of expect. Now this is again being executed on the server. So now from this point, what an attacker would try and do is either they would, we actually missed missed SQL injection. Do people want to see SQL injection? Yeah. Okay. Cool. Exactly. So we're kind of going back a bit here. So obviously, if you've got access to the server, you can actually just view the database and everything anyway. But let's go and quickly look at SQL injection, because everyone loves SQL injection. So So it's actually this search bar again that's vulnerable to SQL injection. So what it's doing is it's taking what we type in and it's searching the database for what we type in. We can inject SQL statements into that SQL statement that it's generating. So the query is normally going to be, select star from products where name, like, then what we type in. But as we can inject into that the field that's coming from this text box here, we can change the logic of the SQL statement. Okay, so what we can do. So a quick way to test if something is vulnerable is just to put in like a little apostrophe, because that's going to change the logic of the statement. And you can see it breaks, which means that it's probably vulnerable to SQL injection. So the next thing we can do is or 1 equals 1. And what this should do, hopefully, is just return everything from the database, everything within that table, right? Because what it's saying is, product name or 1 equals 1, which is always true. So it's just saying return everything from this database. There's no filter on it, basically. And what we can do as well, now, unfortunately, because we are running out of time, I won't be able to talk too much about the details, but we'll see it happening. So if we do this one, so a long nasty statement here, but what we're going to try and do is read the data not just from the products table, but from the users table as well. Okay, let's see if that works. Okay, so what we see here, username and password. It's hashed, but that's the password. So what we've done is we've changed the SQL statement to, rather than just looking at data from the products table, we're also selecting data from the users table and putting those together. So it displays as if it's a product, because the application doesn't know. It's just receiving data from the database. But because we've changed the logic, we've taken data from other tables, it's just kind of merging them, and then we can see that there is usernames and passwords. So again, back to TalkTalk, the reason they were hacked is because they had SQL injection on their website, which was fairly recent. That was only like a couple of years ago, I think. So someone was able to steal the data from the database. So there is actually a there is a cool tool called SQL Map. Has anyone used SQL Map before? So SQL Map is a tool that will automatically find and exploit SQL injection. So what we can do here is we can actually get it to look for SQL injection and just dump the data from the table. Now we can actually dump data from all tables in that database just with literally like one command. So if SQL injection exists, it's super easy for someone to just use these tools to pull all your data out of your database. Which is why it's important not to store like plain text passwords, because if someone does access it, they will need to go that extra step to crack those passwords. Okay, so that's everything. There is. Are we out of time? Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let me just jump back to the presentation quickly and just wrap things up. So how to protect against this? There is no magic bullet. Security champions are important, and Sage mentioned that earlier, which is fantastic. Training is a big thing. If you know these exist, if you know how to think like an attacker, you can develop code that protects against these things. And as testers, you should be thinking like an attacker, trying to think how an attacker would exploit the application to find these kinds of issues. Yeah, secure SDLC, DevSecOps is something people should consider implementing. And everyone should be involved in security, including PMs, testers, developers, should be embedded. If you want to learn more, either get in contact with me. On our website, we have like blogs and white papers and talks and things. OWASP is a organization that has lots of information on security vulnerabilities for web applications. The web application handbook is really good, and there's a Humble book bundle at the moment. You can find it online. For like $1, you get a load of books, digital books, but a load of books. For $15, you get tons, more than you kind of ever read, really. Manchester InfoSec and Manchester Grey Hats, come along if you want to hear a bit more about security. And find the relevant people to follow on kind of like Twitter and whatnot. People have already asked questions, and I think we'll kind of try and wrap things up now. But my details are here. Digital Interruption Twitter handle is there, so follow us if you want to see what kind of research we're doing and putting out. And that's it.